if the church is going to have any sort of positive reputation in the world and any sort of integrity to say this is where the truth is, like come to us to learn about the Lord and to learn what is good and right and holy and true, we've got to expel the wickedness from among us. In response to accusations that he didn't do enough to stop a known abuser in the Church of England, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, has issued the most insincere apology I've ever read that shifts the blame and just does damage control. So let's have a look at the apology. We'll see why it's not only insincere but also kind of untrue and conceals some of the facts. To get you up to speed, the story really quickly is that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, he resigned a couple of weeks ago because it was found in a report that he didn't do enough to stop a really prolific abuser in the Church of England. He stepped down, and Stephen Cottrell, who's the Archbishop of York, that's like the second in command, he's set to sort of fill in for Justin Welby until there's a new Archbishop of Canterbury. He said at the time that it was the, quote, right and honourable thing to do to step down, and yet here we are a couple of weeks later, and it turns out that Stephen Cottrell has a similar story in his past. He was a bishop in the Diocese of Chelmsford, where a man called David Tudor was a priest, and David Tudor did some unspeakable things, like really awful things, and was allowed to continue in ministry, not just by Stephen Cottrell, by many, but amongst others, it was Stephen Cottrell allowed this man to continue in ministry until 2019, and he was only banned from being a minister for life in October of this year. So very similar circumstances seemingly to Justin Welby, and yet Stephen Cottrell not only is like refusing to stand down, but issued this apology, and wait till you read this. This will blow your mind. This statement was made by the Archbishop of York on Monday the 16th of December, a personal statement from Stephen Cottrell, Archbishop of York, in response to this stuff that's come out from the BBC. So he starts, "The situation I faced when I became Bishop of Chelmsford was horrible and intolerable, most of all for the survivors and victims who bravely come forward and shared their stories from the 1980s. First and foremost, he's saying that, I'm a victim here. I'm a victim of the circumstances. And it's not just in this wee section. We'll see that that's something he keeps coming back to. Now, Stephen Cottrell did become Bishop of Chelmsford in 2010, I believe. This man, David Tudor, had been doing his thing from the late 80s. But to open this statement by saying, I inherited a really hard position, it's not a great start to an apology. It says this morning's news coverage incorrectly implies that no action was taken until 2024. That's not actually true. From what I read, well, I did read the full report and I made another video about it and showing segments from some of the report. It wasn't implied that he didn't do anything until 2024. The accusation here is not total inaction. The accusation here, as with the case of Justin Welby, was that there wasn't enough done, that it was kind of tiptoed around, and to quote his own words here, which we'll see in a minute, which is just astounding, the risk was managed rather than David Tudor just being removed and the stops being pulled out to just do whatever could be done to get him out of office. He's wrong here to say that it implied no action was taken until 2014. This was not the case. And then he goes on to say, I'm actually the hero here. I'm the good guy. In my capacity as Bishop of Chelmsford, I suspended David Tudor from office at the first opportunity when a new victim came forward to the police in 2019. Up until then, there were no legal grounds to take alternative action. And this is a kind of underlying theme with all of these stories, that the policies and the legalities around this in terms of church law makes it quite difficult to just boot a rector. They're not employees, they're office holders is the phrase, and some of them have, to like use the language, some of them, including David Tudor, had this freehold status, which is like a sort of protection that you essentially can't be fired. It's in place to stop, in theory, it's in place to stop, so like a new minister comes and is shaking things up a bit in a good way. Freehold protects them from just being booted out by the church, but this has then gone on to be abused by abusers. Here's more of how Stephen Cottrell is the hero. When I joined the Chelmsford Diocese in 2010, I worked closely with this very professional safeguarding team to ensure the risk was managed. So at this stage, the man has had multiple court cases against him. He spent 6 months in prison, which was then overturned because of a technicality. I go into a bit more of the details in the previous video. There's been a laundry list of things that this man has done. He admitted to sleeping with a 16-year-old who was seemingly 15 at the time, but then his defense in court was, Your Honor, she was 16, so it was legal, and he got away with that. Saying, okay, we're going to manage this risk. Like, that's the issue. That is the problem, that the risk was managed and not eliminated. And we're going to see an example of a different instance where the stops were pulled out to remove someone from office, and it's ugly and it kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth, but they did sort of belatedly, in this instance that we're going to look at, belatedly did what they had to do, but it's inaccurate to say that nothing could be done. It was not possible to remove David Tudor from office until fresh complaints were made. I doubt that. Difficult, legally difficult, but as I've said before, why not just fire the guy and then take the hit for unlawful firing? I can't remember the word right now. Unlawful, don't know, disemployment. It's not that. I suspended David Tudor from all ministry pending the investigation and subsequent tribunal hearing in which he was removed from office and prohibited from ministry for life. So again, he's the hero. Now this is, I was going to say this is the bit that annoys me, but it all kind of annoys me. I am deeply sorry that we were not able to take action earlier. That's not an apology. Okay, if someone says to you, like, oh, I'm deeply sorry that couldn't happen. I'm deeply sorry that it was impossible to... Like, that's not an apology. You're not apologizing for what you have done. You're not acknowledging any form of guilt or wrongdoing. You're just saying, it's unfortunate that these were the circumstances. It's sad that that's what it was, but it is what it is. That was the situation I inherited. In fairness, Lord Carey, who was a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, he was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time that David Tudor, like a lot of this stuff was happening, late 90s, early 2000s. He has resigned as a priest because he was involved in this, and he facilitated David Tudor coming back to work after a 5-year ban for assaulting 3 girls. So this is not just about Stephen Cottrell, but similarly, the John Smythe thing was not just about Justin Welby. There have been many people who could and should have done better. I don't know their names, I'm sure someone does, but Stephen Cottrell is about to take over the Church of England and become the institutional head. And if he thought it was the right and honourable thing to do for Justin Welby to step down and take that institutional hit, then like the exact same thing applies here. It's almost worse because he has stood back and said, yes, I applaud the victims for their bravery, and I think it's very bad that people were abused and that this was covered up. And then it comes out that like he's got some skeletons in the closet. It's extremely disappointing that this story is being reported as if it was an abuser being ignored or even protected. That's not how it's being presented. He mentioned that previously, but it's been presented as he didn't do enough. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth, and to present it this way only re-traumatizes already hurt people. So not only is he saying, I'm the good guy here, I did everything I could, and I'm a victim of this journalism. He's saying that your journalism is the problem, and this story coming out in this way is re-traumatizing people who've been hurt. Well, there are people who wouldn't have been hurt if he had taken decisive and firm action whenever he had the office. The situation with David Tudor was an awful situation to live with, and has meant that many people suffered it has meant many people suffering as a result. I want victims and survivors to know that everything was done to understand, assess, and manage the risk. No, like the man went to jail for 6 months. He admitted that he slept with a 16-year-old. I heard in cases like this, there are the things that come out on the news, and then there are the things that anecdotally people share about, oh, I had a cousin who lived in that area. There was a youth club that used to run beside the rectory where he lived, and after he was banned from having any contact with kids or going into any schools, they moved the youth club away so that he wouldn't pose an immediate threat to the youth club. And yet this man continued to be in ministry. He was suspended from ministry for 5 years in 88, but then was able to return to ministry in the Diocese of Southwark. Changes to the way safeguarding is now managed and scrutinised would mean that wouldn't happen now, but it did happen then. That's the thing that Lord Carey is involved in, that the man, Lord Carey, I don't know a whole lot about him. I only read the BBC report about his resignation. He said that he doesn't remember David Tudor's name, and yet there are records and documents saying that Lord Carey pushed to have David Tudor's name removed from a list of clergy who'd faced disciplinary action, and he put him in a diocese, and those steps were taken with, quote, much trepidation. You're like, if it's been done with much trepidation, don't do it. But this is, again, sort of historic stuff. Church of England needs independent safeguarding, scrutiny, all that sort of stuff. I have publicly supported this for many years. I pledge myself to do what I can to achieve it. Once again, he's the hero. Now, that comes across as just so insincere, so self-absorbed and narcissistic, and pushing the blame away to other people. The situation I was in, the situation I inherited. I legally did as much as I could, and I did all the good things that had him banned from ministry. It's like, that's not an apology. And the shamelessness of this man to say, to refuse to resign at the minute. At present, he hasn't resigned. At present, there's also a petition out for calling for his resignation with tens of thousands of signatures. But let's have a look at an instance where a guy called Canon John Hindley, this story broke in August. I would have talked about it, but I was really quite busy with work. Similar sort of situation of a man abusing his position of trust to do awful things, and he was essentially paid off by the Church of England to leave, which is not pretty. It's not ideal, but at least I guess it shows that it can be done. And with the Church of England having pledged £1 billion to sort of sort out their historic links with slavery, money's not really a problem for the Church of England. So if it costs $250,000 per pop to get rid of abusive, manipulative, evil ministers, then that's what it costs. Take the hit. It's pennies to them. 2022, Canon Hindley was offered £240,000 to leave. There's all sorts of awful things that he did. Really not good. A 2009 cathedral inspection concluded that this guy may pose a threat to young men and to the cathedral's name. Here's something that came from the report, just a wee excerpt. Should the unthinkable happen, accusations of inaction will fly, a life will be damaged, God's name besmirched, and the reputation of the cathedral damaged. That is exactly what happened, and yet at least they did get rid of him. Decades too late, but it shows that something can be done. It really feels like God is shaking up the Church of England. I'm always reluctant to say, connect things and say, this is clearly what God is doing, because God tells us and reveals stuff in his word. That's authoritative and that's true. But I don't want to be like, Job's friends in the book of Job who are like, you're suffering because you've sinned. And he's like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yeah, you are. And then God comes back and he's like, you can't speak for me. You incorrectly spoke for me and that's wrong. So yeah, I don't want to be like that, but it's hard to not connect all of these things and be like, God is judging the Church of England. I'll leave you with this wee scripture recently that I read, and I was like, oh, this feels very fit in with this whole Church of England situation. Not to say I'm always keen to remind myself that whenever I'm looking at other churches and being like, Church of England, what are you doing? I need to make sure that I'm walking in integrity. Proverbs 10, maybe chapter 11. Proverbs says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his way crooked will be found out. So I need to be walking in integrity. I need to realize that this is in all areas of the church. This isn't just Church of England. This is everywhere, probably, unfortunately. But we need to root it out. But these are words from Malachi 2 that kind of precede a really famous Christmas Advent passage that gets talked about at this time of year. It is God's rebuke against the priests, the religious leaders of the time, for breaking the covenant by not teaching faithfully, which is what the Church of England have done. Breaking covenant through divorce. God is really comes down hard on that. Kind of, you could say it's about disrespecting marriage and not honouring that. And then it goes on and says, breaking covenant through injustice. And then we get into chapter 3 and it talks about the messenger and stuff. But look at this. The lips of a priest ought to preserve knowledge, because he is the messenger of the Lord Almighty, and people seek instruction from his mouth. But you have turned from the way, and by your teaching have caused many to stumble. You violated the covenant with Levi, says the Lord Almighty. So I have caused you to be despised and humiliated before all the people, because you have not followed my ways, but have shown partiality in matters of the law. Does that not ring so true for where the Church of England's at the minute? I remember reading that and thinking, wow, that could have been written today. And yeah, again, this isn't just a Church of England thing, but certainly with the case of John Smythe and David Tudor and Justin Welby and Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, and this is the thing that kind of connects it with Christmas, Advent, the time where we think of Jesus' first coming and his second coming, but also the time where we think of him coming into our lives and what he does in our lives. This kind of connects it here, and I just think this is perhaps quite providential that it's happening at this time of year. I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. There's Malachi 3. I think that is directly picked up, referring about John the Baptist. It's certainly a very clear prophecy to John the Baptist, who then preceded the coming of Jesus. But speaking of the coming of the Lord, who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. The Levites were the ones who served in the temple in the ancient Israel. Then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness, and the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be acceptable to the Lord, as in days gone by, as in former years. The refiner's fire, the launderer's soap, these are things that are tough and abrasive and really quite extreme, but they're used to draw out impurities, to take something that is good, to draw the dirt and the uncleanness and impurity out of it so that it can be pure and unblemished as it was supposed to be and as it's desired to be. And this is what the Lord desires of his church, that we would be pure and unblemished, that we would be, to quote, as Paul writes in Timothy, articles of gold and silver useful for every work in the master's house. If there's corruption in the church, though, it needs to be rooted out. So that's where we're at the minute. But will this be the end of it? I don't know. Will Stephen Cottrell resign? I hope so, but I don't know. There are many others involved in this, and if the church is going to have any sort of positive reputation in the world and any sort of integrity to say, this is where the truth is, come to us to learn about the Lord and to learn what is good and right and holy and true, we've got to expel the wickedness from among us. That's all for now. God bless. See you soon.